people always think the Second Amendment, it's about a gun. And I'm a concealed carry person, but it really is about human rights.
Hi folks, Richard Rogers, board member with Iowa Firearms Coalition here. I'm in Newton, Iowa with State Representative Jon Dunwell, one of the assistant majority leaders in the Iowa House of Representatives. Representative Dunwell has been a strong voice for the Second Amendment and issues of concern to our members and our followers during this is your second term in the Iowa House. And I just thought this would be a good chance for our viewers to get to know the assistant majority leader a little bit. Welcome.
Good to be here. Thank you for coming out tonight.
You bet, you bet. Now, Jon, you grew up in the Midwest, but you spent a long time down, 21 years?
Yeah, so I'm a native Minnesotan. Grew up in Shakopee, but then when I married Christy, we lived down in Orlando, Florida for 21 years, and 12 years ago we moved back to Newton, Iowa, which is my wife's hometown.
And you were a minister down there?
I was a pastor at a church in probably one of the greatest underserved communities in Orlando.
All right. Well, I'm sure you have a lot of stories to tell about those years.
Okay.
And you're also a certified financial planner, or experienced professional.
Yeah, I'm a financial rep, and but my real passion is coaching, and I do working with nonprofits and working with churches is my real passion of what I do.
Right, and so that's what you're doing back here. But you were elected in a special election. Is that?
Yeah, that's correct. So I ran initially in a seat that people said you'll never win. It's been held by the Democrats for the last 47 years. And running against an incumbent, and I lost by just a little bit. And after he served one more year, I think he saw the writing on the wall, and so he decided to take another job, and then ended up leaving that seat open, and they had a special election. And we stepped into that seat and won it by about 60% of the vote. And so I served that 1 year, and then, believe it or not, because I was just fulfilling an unfulfilled term, I had to run again.
Right.
And so I ran my third election, and we won by similar margin last November as well.
Oh, very good. And as you said, I believe this seat had been held by the other party for
47 years.
A very long time.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you a little bit more about how you got involved in politics and so on, but that brings up a point that Iowa Firearms Coalition, of course, is a nonpartisan organization. The Democrat Party generally, as everybody knows, it's not secret, it's not friendly to Second Amendment issues anymore. The first award that our predecessor group, Iowa Carry, ever gave to an Iowa legislator was to a Democrat senator.
Oh.
But times have changed, and you're probably not aware of that, but times have changed, and unfortunately the Democrat Party as an institution is not friendly to our cause. But that doesn't mean that individual Democrats are not. And so last November, we had an election, and I'm pleased to say that after many years of work by our group and others, that we passed with almost a two-thirds of Iowa voters passed what we call the Freedom Amendment. Absolutely. That had strong protections for the right to keep bear arms to Iowa's Constitution.
That's right.
Obviously, a lot of Democrats voted for that.
Absolutely.
And if you say you had a district that hadn't been won by your party for 47 years, and now you're having comfortable margins,
right?
And hopefully you'll be able to sustain that. I think people are very pleased with your service, and we can talk a little bit more about what that's like for you a little later. How did you decide, once you came back here and you'd been living back in the Newton area for a while, how did you decide to become involved actively in politics and to run for public office?
Well, first you have to know, when I was a freshman in high school, if you had to pick my dream career, it wasn't really ministry. It was going to be, I wanted to be a lobbyist. So I was way back in high school. I said,
I gave you some tips.
Yeah, there you go. Haven't been a lobbyist yet. But when I was involved in ministry in Orlando, Florida, an underserved community, I found myself becoming the senior chaplain for the Orange County Sheriff's Office, overseeing 40 other chaplains, 1,200 sworn personnel. I was involved with the community council, helping to make a difference in a struggling community. I ended up being involved with the board of the YMCA and helped start a couple YMCAs in the Orlando area. So I've always been engaged in community. So when I moved here and I was now in the business world, I got involved in the Republican Party and started getting engaged with different committees and groups in the community. And so this was just a natural expression of, hey, I want to make a difference in my community. I'd like to serve. I got involved in Republican party here, and the next thing I know, I'm thinking, well, why don't I put my name in the hat? It's just taking my service to the community to kind of a different level. And so I decided to run and kind of enjoy the process of running, because it's about people. I get a chance to connect with people, be with people, get a chance to be engaged in conversations about things that matter, things that make a difference. And so that's kind of how it ended up being that way.
Well, that's a good thing you enjoy it, because in the House, you have to stand for election every 2 years, which that's good in the sense that it keeps you in touch. Having to face the electorate every 2 years, it keeps you in touch with the will of the people, the interests of the people. But it is like a constant campaign, and so it can be worried. What did you expect it would be like to actually serve in office? And is that, do you feel that you were naive, or you had a pretty good idea, and how's the reality been for you?
You know, it's hard. It's such a different experience. I didn't quite know what it would feel like or what it'd be like. What I would say is this: after having served in these last couple of years, being involved in leadership, working with both my own colleagues, my own party, and across the aisle, it's a better experience than I anticipated. In state government, democracy or representative democracy is alive and well. I love the engagement and the role that our citizens play in the government. They're at the Capitol all the time sharing their thoughts. I even appreciate the lobby from a perspective, these knowledgeable individuals that help me understand both sides of the issue. And you know, in the legislature, you learn it's a team sport. We don't get anything done unless we have 51 House members, 26 senators, and a governor who come to an agreement. And so there's give and take. And you know, we get a chance to have the full voice of Iowa speaking on issues. So, you know, I may represent Jasper County, but every bill that we vote on is really for the entire state. And so in one sense, we're all representing all of Iowa.
Exactly. I wanted to point that out to our viewers, that while not many of the people watching this may be in Jasper County and Newton in Representative Dunwell's district, but certainly what he does, and he realizes this, affects all Iowans, and particularly at the committee level, when only a few legislators are making decisions about what may come before the entire body or may not. Then they're judging it for the benefit of all the people of Iowa. And then also, particularly let's talk a little bit about your role as Assistant Majority Leader. What that's about.
First off, I get a great parking spot and I get an office. But no, really, part of what I do is there are 4 assistant majority leaders, and think of the majority leader kind of directing us. But we have a quadrant of representatives that we kind of oversee. So we actually have a weekly meeting, and part of that weekly meeting is where I communicate to my quadrant, hey, here's what's coming down the road, here are the things we're working on. And part of what happens in those meetings is I also say, what would you like to share? And so we get a chance to hear what's going back in the districts, and then I share that with not only the majority leader and the speaker pro tem and the whip, but also the speaker of the House. We have our weekly
leadership
meeting as well.
meeting.
Yeah, leadership meeting. We get a chance to talk about all this stuff. So it's part about facilitating that communication, because everything we do is teamwork.
All right. And who is the majority leader of the Iowa House?
Oh, Matt Winchell, man. He's a friend of your organization.
Matt Winchell. He's been carrying the water for the Second Amendment, protection of the Second Amendment for many years in Iowa.
He's
and
fantastic.
he has many other people backstopping him now.
He does.
With the enhanced conservative, pro-liberty, pro-Second Amendment majority that you have.
Yeah. We certainly have learned about, you know, people always think the Second Amendment, it's about a gun. And I'm a concealed carry person, but it really is about human rights. It's about saying how far government can go. It's about respecting basic rights. And so to me, we have to keep that in mind every time something comes up. This isn't just about guns or the right to carry a gun. It's about our human rights and the rights that we need to have, and restricting government how far they can go.
The right to keep and bear arms, our Second Amendment rights, are the rights that are the ultimate guarantor of all of our other rights. As long as we have access to effective weaponry, we're unlikely to ever need to use that weaponry in defense of a homegrown tyranny.
Right.
But were we to lose that access, it's very likely, in my opinion, that at some point we would wish that we had it and perhaps not be able to get it. I had something I wanted to ask you about the Second Amendment there, but to skip to another point, how do you haven't been shy about your respect for the Second Amendment rights,
Not at all.
and you were enthusiastic about the passage of the Freedom Amendment to add
Correct.
strong protections to our state constitution. How do you, and I say you haven't been shy about it, what reaction do you get among your constituents when you talk about this issue? And again, remembering that you're in a district that the Democrat Party, not friendly to our issues, won for 47 years straight.
Yeah, so first off, I think the majority of Iowans absolutely are support of the Second Amendment, support of the Freedom Amendment, and will share that quite publicly. But there are those who will raise concerns about violence in our community, they'll raise concerns about shootings, they'll raise concerns about gun violence, and we always listen to those concerns, and we appreciate those concerns. But part of it, I think we have to realize is what is happening in our society that causes these things to happen. And if we're going to deal with some of these issues of violence and things in our community, we have to be taking a look at what's happening in the home, what's happening in our education system, what's happening with mental health, and some of those issues that really cause some of that violence. Richard, every time we see one of these tragic incidents, which are tragic, sure. and people jump on certain issues one side or the other, I say, you still have to pause and say, what caused, let's just say, a young man to walk into a high school and to do something like that? What was going on in their mind? I mean, how do you stop someone who has that kind of intent in their heart? And so there's something going on, there's something broken in our society and our culture that leads for these things to happen. But those are the issues that people bring up. But obviously, there's a lot of support in the community.
I'm a firm believer that most of our problems in this country are cultural problems.
They are.
The political issues we may have stem from the cultural problems. And so I think it's really good to have a person of your background, your faith background, your ministry background in this position. Not everybody in the legislature needs to be a minister.
Nope.
But I think it's good to have some of that because you've seen what happens at the family dynamic, across a large population at the family level.
Yeah.
And either the strength that can bring or what happens when there's deterioration in the family.
And Richard, I would say that's what people misunderstand about the legislature. So when people say, well, a doctor should be making that decision, or law enforcement should be making that decision, or another professional, I say, no, you don't get it. We bring in the legislature people from all walks of life, from all professions. The legislature is made up of doctors, it's made up of lawyers, it's made up of pastors and teachers and highway patrolmen and farmers and retired citizens who all are coming together to discuss an issue. That's what it's supposed to be. Not just one particular profession or one particular area coming and saying this is the way it ought to be. We saw it in COVID, didn't we?
Right.
We need the full complement of community to wrestle through hard issues. And that's what happens in the legislature, in the House and the Senate.
Right.
You have a very diverse group of people attacking an issue and figuring out what a solution looks like.
Right. And while always keeping in mind the nature of individual liberty
Absolutely.
and freedom of action, so that the answer will come from us, the people,
Yeah.
and not from somebody on
Well-
higher up planning our lives for us. That just never seems to work.
Go ahead.
I think something. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, part of the challenges we have in culture today is everything's being defined. And I'm a person who likes to lean on freedom and realize, and don't take us the wrong way, freedom's a little messy. And
Yes.
I'd rather have a little more mess than everything trying to be orderly, because that's when we're controlled.
Right. Those 5-year and 20-year plans that the Soviets always had never seemed to work out too well, did they?
No.
You mentioned earlier that it's not about the gun, it's about human liberties. And
That's right.
People at the Capitol, people in Iowa politics tend to think of me as the gun guy because I do volunteer lobbying for Iowa Firearms Coalition, but in actual fact, I'm the liberty guy. I'm a liberty lobbyist, so there's that. Specifically, we have whittled down a lot of the bad laws that were allowed to creep into the Iowa Code, many of them long ago, that restrict our right to keep and bear arms.
Right.
We got the amendment passed, the Freedom Amendment passed last November, but a few months earlier, the Supreme Court made crystal clear to lower courts across the nation that they may no longer treat Second Amendment rights as second-class rights, which is a phrase that Justice Clarence Thomas has used repeatedly over the years. And finally, in what's called the Bruin decision in June of last year, they said, absolutely, you have a right to carry a a firearm for personal defense when you're out and about, and this right shall not be infringed. That doesn't mean there could be no regulation. If the founders who passed the Bill of Rights in 1791 had a regulation on firearms or arms, it used to be swords and such, and then firearms, and maybe in the future it'll be Star Trek phasers,
Yeah,
who
who
knows?
knows?
But arms, if there was a regulation on arms at that time, they obviously didn't consider that to be an infringement when they wrote the Second Amendment, shall not be infringed.
Right.
As we know, they had very few. They had laws that said, for instance, you can't murder or assault somebody with a firearm or other arm, but they didn't license them, register them, make you go to the local sheriff or magistrate in order to get permission to buy one. In fact, just a year after the Bill of Rights was adopted in 1791, the Militia Act of 1792 says everybody 18 to, I believe it's 45, every male, has to show up for militia muster with guns, powder, ball, and the other necessary equipment to go off and fight in the militia. 18 to 45, you had to have that. The government didn't give it to you, you had to bring it with you. So they expected people to be armed. Anyway, we have made a lot of improvements in the law in Iowa, and there's not a long list of things we need yet to do. Iowa law now recognizes, protects, and even respects the individual right to keep and bear arms, I believe. One thing we are concerned about at Iowa Firearms Coalition, and we've been working on it very proactively over the last year or so, is how to enhance the protection of students in schools.
Right.
As you mentioned earlier, these tragic cases of mass murders, they are very rare,
They are rare.
but every one of them is a terrible tragedy. We have realized, and many across the country are beginning to realize, that the only way to limit the casualties when something like this may eventually happen, as rare as it is to have immediate response, violent response, armed response to the evil person, the deranged person that comes into a school or a plant, factory, workplace, shopping mall, whatever. But particularly a school, because the people in charge of the school have a duty of care to those students.
Yeah,
and
a
they're not
minute,
able to
a
defend
minute,
themselves.
2 minutes, 3 minutes
That's right.
away means more casualties.
These people have a tendency statistically to murder one person every 10 seconds.
Yeah.
It's even a little quicker at the beginning and slows down a little bit later, but at one person every 10 seconds. So every minute that goes by, that's a lot of folks. If you're going to keep the casualty down to single digit numbers, you need to have a response right away. So we have worked, there have been some school districts in Iowa that wanted to carefully train and arm staff members, not necessarily teachers. In fact, initially they weren't going to use teachers, but to have the people who are willing, present, and able to meet violence if violence comes to them. We've had a problem, a roadblock in Iowa because the company that basically has a monopoly on insurance for school boards here has said they won't cover companies or school districts that arm staff. So we're going to have to deal with that in the coming legislative session. There was a bill this last session, the provision that related to that probably was inadequate, and I think we need to revisit it, but we will be looking at that.
Good.
Texas, their law just went into effect that says every school has to have armed responders, whether it be a school resource officer, which costs like $100,000 a year,
Right.
or there are several other options, all relatively expensive, or what they call a school guardian program there, where they have either a volunteer or a staff member who's again selected carefully, trained and armed, and then they're dispersed throughout the building. The school resource officer can only be in one place at one time.
Yeah, and my son's college in Florida has a Sentinel program where nobody knows who they are.
Right.
They are trained staff, and they actually, in connection with the sheriff's office, my understanding is that when a incident happens, they immediately become deputies and have deputy powers, but they're armed and they are trained to respond to any kind of mass incident on the campus. And so they work in connection with the sheriff's office and the training and in terms of things like that. I think there's some good ideas like that. So I think that's something we have to take a look at from the insurance industry part. I think the other part too, Richard, we have to take a look at is if I'm going to some place, it could be as simple as me going to a school board meeting. You do have to realize I can't bring I'm always concealed carry, that means I have to put my gun someplace. And typically can't just be placed in my car. I have to, unload it, and I have to put it in the lock case, the ammunition separate. All the things we have to do to be on school grounds. And at that point, I'm vulnerable. I don't have that right anymore. Or if I'm dropping my child off at school, if I'm going, what if I worked at a corporation that didn't allow any kind of concealed carry on the plant or the office building, or didn't allow it in the parking lot? That means every day when I'm driving back, and for me, I go to Des Moines a lot. That means driving back and forth that 41 miles every day. If I stop at a service station, wherever it is, I can't carry my weapon because I can't have it on the grounds. Those are some things we have to work on.
Right. For a number of years, probably the biggest request we've gotten from our members and friends is that parking lot issue at private and public companies, that if I can't have it in my car, out of sight, in a locked car, my private car, where I have an expectation of privacy, that means I can't have it throughout my day, and maybe I drive 40 miles to work and 40 miles back. So that's something that we're dealing with in legislation last year that's still alive in the Senate, but we need to revisit that. We look forward to your help on that, and also some assistance with trying to better prepare school districts who are seeing the light and realizing they want to do this. A lot of schools are interested in doing it. Two school districts broke the log jam, Cherokee and Spirit Lake this year, and started these programs. We have been trying to facilitate that, raise their awareness of what things they need to do, and find them resources from nationally trained, nationally known trainers and so on. And in fact, we had what we call Educators Academy just a few weeks ago in Johnston, where we brought in a number of school administrators and staff for some in-depth training, 3 days and 1 evening. And it was very successful. It was designed to be a pilot program. We're not able to train all the teachers in Iowa.
Right.
That's not our job, but we're trying to facilitate that, and we look forward to your assistance in the legislature coming up. So is there anything else you'd like to say to our viewers right now?
I just say how much I appreciate Iowa Firearms Coalition. I know that if I got a question about what's not only happening here in Iowa in terms of the Second Amendment, but you guys are a great resource what's happening nationally, because we're affected by what happens in Washington, D.C., some of the things there, and I sure appreciate the information that you continually provide for us, your continual presence at the Capitol, and standing up for the Second Amendment and keeping us informed. So thank you very much.
Well, I appreciate that. I will say one further thing, reflection on working at the Capitol, is that you talked about appreciating your constituents and the rest of Iowans, and they come to the Capitol and talk about the lobbyists too, but there are only, you mentioned 100 people, and you need 51 in the House. There are only 150 representatives at the state level, 50 senators and 100 representatives. And I will tell you that it's much easier for you as an Iowa citizen to have discussions with these people, to make them aware of what your concerns are, what your ideas are, either through email or at their legislative coffees in the district during the session, or to come to the Capitol, at least on our Second Amendment Day, which will be in January this year. I don't have the date on my tip of my tongue, but to make your concerns known, because it's much easier to influence that than it is the 435 people on Capitol Hill in Washington, who frankly shouldn't be meddling at the state level as much as they do anyway. So it's very important that you do that, and we appreciate your listening to us.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you for the time.
I enjoyed it. Blessings.